Today we're unpacking a really fascinating stack of sources, interviews, industry analysis, you name it, to get inside the mind of, well, one of the most recognizable faces on the planet.
You hear the name John Cena, and you immediately think, wrestling superstar, action hero.
Exactly. And now, more and more, this surprisingly good comedic actor.
But if you actually dig underneath that very polished surface, the sources we've looked at reveal a mind that is just built on this intense discipline, on radical accountability.
And a willingness to take on these decade-long challenges just to break into a new market.
Yeah, so our mission today is to get past that highlight reel. We want to extract the core wisdom behind his whole career and really focus on how he took these huge failures, geopolitical blunders, movies that bombed, absolutely terrible wrestling gimmicks,
Right.
and he turned them into these potent, actionable opportunities for growth.
It's a career that seems to be defined by two things happening at once: this relentless, nonstop effort, and then these incredibly calculated risks.
And there's really no better example of that dual nature than the hook that we found in the material to start us off. His decade-long, frankly grueling commitment to learning Mandarin Chinese.
That's where we have to start. It just frames the whole story perfectly.
Think about it. We're talking about someone who dedicated himself for about 10 years to studying an incredibly complex tonal language.
And this wasn't some, casual Duolingo habit he picked up on his phone.
No, not at all. This was a fundamental strategic play. It was an attempt at cultural penetration and business penetration.
And the level of commitment, it's just staggering, especially when you hear him talk about the end result. He's incredibly honest about it. Even after a decade of work, he says he's not even conversationally fluent.
Which is just, it's incredible humility, isn't it? He mentions he got to a point where he was actually dreaming in Mandarin, where the conversations were just flowing in his sleep.
But the waking reality of it, of mastering the tones, the endless characters, it was a monumental task that he says he still hasn't finished.
The sheer time frame, a decade, and then the honesty to admit that even that wasn't enough to achieve fluency, that immediately sets the stage. It tells you everything you need to know about the kind of commitment we're going to be talking about today. This was about putting in the work, period, regardless of whether the output was ever going to be perfect.
So why Mandarin? Why that specific, incredibly difficult language? Let's get into the business motivation, because the sources lay it out so clearly.
Okay, so the time frame is around 2011, 2012. And at this point, WWE has achieved this massive global reach. He lists off all the places they've performed.
Moscow, the Philippines, South Africa, and then he throws in Bangor, Maine, just for color.
Right. They're everywhere. But there was this one enormous, completely untapped market, China.
And for a whole bunch of reasons, the sources are clear that China just didn't understand professional wrestling, at least not the American version of it.
So the idea was actually elegantly simple, but also pretty radical. What if a top-tier global superstar, the face of the entire company, could actually speak the language?
Maybe he could be the one to break down that cultural barrier, to personally usher the WWE into that absolutely crucial market.
And this wasn't just, his pet project. The sources detailed that this was part of a larger systemic growth strategy from the company.
Right. This was around the time WWE was launching this big initiative to, I guess, professionalize the sport even more. They started offering talent all these benefits that went way beyond just what happens in the ring.
Things like financial advice, right? Help with secondary education, and this is the critical part for our story. A free second language program for anyone who wanted it.
That context is so important. It shows the sport is really maturing. It's moving way beyond its old roots as, a carnival attraction or this ruthless territorial business.
It was evolving into a global media enterprise, one that actually valued the longevity of its talent and their education outside of the ring.
And so he noticed that a lot of the younger wrestlers, they weren't taking advantage of these new benefits, not the education, not the language classes.
So he decided he was going to do it himself, to lead by example. He signed up for the free language program, specifically for Chinese, to show he was all in on the company's biggest expansion goal.
That phrase, lead by example, is so interesting. Is it just pure altruism, you think? Or is there also a layer of, strategic professional alignment there?
I think it has to be both. By committing himself to the company's most ambitious, most difficult global goal, he's cementing his own value. He's not just an in-ring performer anymore, he's a corporate ambassador.
That kind of buy-in from your top star.
Yeah.
That guarantees you long-term relevance. It's smart business.
It's very smart. And it was a personal challenge for sure, but it was wrapped up in this massive business necessity. And in the long run, it seems like it did pay off for the business. He mentions there are now these thriving wrestling promotions in China, so that barrier did eventually break down.
But the personal cost, the immersion required from him, it was extreme.
Oh, absolutely. He studied for roughly 10 years. He said the written characters were just impossible for him to learn, so he focused completely on pinyin.
Which is the Romanized sort of English phonetic version of the characters.
Exactly. And he got so dedicated that when he was filming a movie with Jackie Chan, Project X, he lived in China for 6 or 7 months, specifically in Inner Mongolia, in a place called Yinchuan Province.
And he talks about that profound sense of immersion he felt there. He describes himself as the only person who looked like him, and that the locals just knew him as the big white guy.
That kind of sustained commitment, you'd think it would guarantee success. But this is where the story takes a very dark, but also incredibly instructive turn.
This is the moment where the difference between knowing the language and knowing the culture becomes painfully clear.
It's the core lesson of that entire decade of study, all wrapped up in one single moment.
Okay, so let's set the scene. He's on a massive global press tour for a film, and he's crushing it. He estimates he'd done about 70% of all his media interviews and appearances in Mandarin.
He was fluent enough and engaging enough that people in the audience were actually taking off their translation headphones, which, that's the ultimate sign that you're genuinely connecting.
A huge success.
Yeah.
But then came the geopolitical minefield.
It's the end of a grueling 10-hour day. He's exhausted. He's on stage, reading from a teleprompter that's written in Pinyin, and one line references Taiwan as a country.
And the second the words left his mouth, he knew. He immediately described it as a profound error. He compares it to a Ron Burgundy moment.
Right, from Anchorman. Go fuck yourself, San Diego.
Exactly. Except in this context, the offense was infinitely more serious. He refers to it as potentially the most offensive thing you can say in that particular part of the world.
And you can see in the sources, his immediate realization is that he's just waded into waters that he was completely, utterly unprepared for. He admitted he didn't even check the teleprompter content beforehand because he was so tired he just assumed it was standard promotional fluff.
That lack of understanding of the sheer geopolitical nuance and sensitivity around U.S. policy in that region, it led to an immediate crisis.
The fallout was swift. And it was intense. It's a perfect demonstration of the high cost of cultural ignorance, even when it's completely unintentional.
He had to issue a very public apology to China, which in turn absolutely enraged people back in his home country.
The impossibility of that situation is just, it's tragic, really. He described it as never being enough, that nobody was happy. He was caught between these two massive opposing political forces.
And he felt the professional consequences were so severe, so career-ending, that he immediately called James Gunn, the director, and offered to be fired from Peacemaker. From season 1 of a show, that was a huge comeback for him.
That's a huge moment in this story. To be willing to sacrifice a major career resurgence over one line you read off a teleprompter, it just speaks volumes about the depth of his anxiety over this mistake.
But this crisis, this is the hinge point. This is where his entire philosophy of radical accountability really gets forged.
Absolutely, because everyone, including the interviewers and the sources we looked at, they're suggesting these easy outs, blame the PR assistant, blame the scriptwriter, say it was a setup.
And he refuses all of them. Unequivocally, he just insists over and over, it was my fault.
That choice is the hard path, isn't it? The easy thing is to blame some administrative error. But he realized that blaming other people, it doesn't fix the core problem.
Right. If he blames the PR assistant, he doesn't learn the actual lesson, which is that the language is just a tool. And if you don't have the corresponding cultural wisdom, you are fundamentally dangerously vulnerable.
Exactly. Taking the burden of the fault, that's what allowed him to course correct immediately. His thought process was, okay, what did I learn from this? How do I make absolutely sure this catastrophic error never, ever happens again?
He also noted that his initial reaction, just apologizing immediately to try and plug the hole, it didn't save the ship. It just created a whole other problem. He had to accept that the ship had already sunk.
And the ultimate lasting consequence, and this is the key takeaway for any professional who's trying to operate on an international stage, is that he now strictly avoids speaking foreign languages professionally.
It's a complete 180 on his decade-long goal. He just prefers to stick to English now.
Because he recognizes that what he intended as a nice gesture, trying to connect with people in their own language, could actually completely fucking offend them because of his own admitted lack of cultural depth. He just doesn't have the nuanced wisdom or, frankly, the time to do the research required to navigate that global minefield safely.
That is just a profound dose of humility, a 10-year grind that ends not with him doing multilingual interviews, but with a self-imposed linguistic retreat, all because of the high cost of one single, unintentional cultural misstep.
It really proves that mastery is so much more than just memorization.
Okay, so we've looked at the mental and linguistic grind. Let's pivot now to the sheer physicality of his career, the architecture of the wrestling business itself. The sources give us some incredible detail on how the WWE operation is built so differently from most other combat sports.
The primary difference is the one that the public, I think, misunderstands the most. When that door closes in the UFC octagon, it is pure survival. The best person is supposed to win. There's no predetermined outcome.
But in WWE, when two competitors step into that ring, they are working together. It's a collaboration. The goal is to put on the absolute best, most entertaining show for the audience.
And that collaboration is the fundamental difference that allows for career longevity. Because the risks are calculated, they're choreographed, they're mutually agreed upon, they can minimize the kind of injuries that end careers.
That's the secret sauce, isn't it? It's how you get these careers that last 10, 15, even 20-plus years, especially when you compare that to, say, the NFL, where the average career is just a few seasons.
But, and this is important, we have to be careful not to mistake calculated risk for low risk. Even with perfect choreography, the physical wear and tear is just relentless.
And the sources give us this really shocking comparison of his old schedule versus what's considered normal today.
The schedule shock is immense. He used to perform somewhere between 220 and 230 matches a year.
He calls it, very accurately, 220 days of trauma.
Yeah. And now the whole landscape has shifted so dramatically. A current schedule of 70 matches a year, that's considered a workhorse schedule.
That old schedule is just brutal to even think about. Falling down over and over, taking these planned collisions, slamming into the canvas, the corners.
Yeah.
It's just constant micro-trauma.
So even if the big risks are managed, the cumulative physical debt that you incur over a couple of decades is just enormous.
And that historical grind, that also provides some really crucial context for how creative development has evolved in the business. He really stresses the absolute importance of non-televised events, what they often call house shows.
The traditional structure was essential for development. For every one TV taping, there would be 4 live, non-televised shows. This was the laboratory. This was the environment where he learned how to fail.
He could take these big swings creatively in a small venue.
Yeah.
A gymnasium with, maybe 3,500 people in Lafayette or Little Rock.
And that obscurity, that was a protective shield. He called that environment a gift because, in his words, no one's watching. If he tried something totally outlandish, a new line, a new move, a new character idea, and it just completely bombed.
The risk was contained. They just send the audience home happy with the main event, and by Monday, the failure was forgotten.
And this is where all those famous anecdotes come from. He mentions the origins of his invisible gimmick, the "you can't see me" hand gesture. It all started as a dare from his little brother on some completely meaningless, non-televised Saturday night show.
If it had failed, he just wouldn't have done it again. No harm, no foul. That low-stakes environment was crucial for him to, as he says, get his callus, get his wind and timing, and just figure out what organically connected with a live audience.
This analysis of the past, though, it leads him to identify this massive, immediate problem for new talent today.
The conundrum. Because media content is king now, the whole business model has shifted. Now, pretty much every single segment is televised, 99% of it. And the production value is so slick, so precise.
The safety net is gone. Young talent who are failing today, they are failing immediately, in high definition, in front of the entire world.
They don't have that crucial small room to test their material, to gauge a real audience reaction and develop natural timing without the crushing pressure of global scrutiny.
So they're forced to prioritize a perfect choreographed performance that looks good for the camera over the messy, necessary experimentation that's required for real creative growth.
It's like asking a stand-up comedian to do their first ever open mic set at a Madison Square Garden taping for a Netflix special.
Exactly. You lose the ability to fail privately and learn from it, which is a key component of accelerated development in any field, not just wrestling.
They're skipping the essential steps, the trial and error that builds confidence and a true connection with the live audience. They're just focused on what the producer in the back is saying in their ear, not the visceral reaction of the crowd in the building.
And beyond the business side of things, the sources revealed this unique and, frankly, astonishing personal philosophy he has when it comes to physical pain and recovery.
Given his two-decade career, the list of injuries is long. He's had about 10 major physical surgeries. We're talking a neck fusion, reattachment of both triceps, a pec reattachment, even his nose being surgically relocated after an injury.
But what really stands out here, what is truly exceptional, is his absolute defiance when it comes to pain management. He maintains, and the sources back this up, that he has never taken a single pain pill. No Vicodin, no opioids for any of these major invasive procedures.
And he has the proof. He literally keeps the full labeled prescription bottles of painkillers, some of them dating back to 2008, just sitting in a drawer.
I mean, that's not just unusual. It actively defies standard medical protocol. He notes that the very first thing every medical facility tries to manage after surgery is the patient's pain.
So what's his reasoning? He partly attributes it to just knowing his own pain threshold, being so accustomed to the constant trauma of football and wrestling.
But his philosophical justification goes a lot deeper. He views opioids as a trap because they distract you from the pain that he believes is necessary for healing and for effective physical therapy.
Let's unpack that a little. He's arguing that pain is essential biofeedback. If you chemically numb those senses, you can't accurately gauge how much effort you should be putting into your PT. You can't listen to your body when it's trying to warn you that you're pushing too far too fast.
It's another form of that radical accountability, but this time it's applied to his own body. He's making a calculation that the risk of re-injury or of improper healing because he's masking the symptoms is far greater than the excruciating reality of just enduring the pain naturally.
He also speculates a little on the psychological side of it. He suggests that people who become highly vulnerable to pain pills are often really fearing the anxiety of pain itself more than the actual physical sensation.
He calls pain tolerance a profoundly personal experience. He notes that some people just cannot function with any level of discomfort, and so they're naturally more susceptible to the numbing distraction that pills offer.
It does raise a big question, though. Is he just, genetically gifted with an incredibly high pain tolerance, or is this a learned psychological defiance?
The sources strongly imply it's the latter, that his years in these rigorous athletic environments taught him how to compartmentalize pain, to use it as a tool, not as an enemy to be silenced.
And the sources give us this really powerful, visceral anecdote to illustrate the trade-offs in different recovery methods. Specifically, he contrasts two different approaches to ACL reconstruction.
Right. So when he had his ACL rebuilt using what's called the patella tendon graft method, where surgeons literally slice out a chunk of your own bone and tissue from your kneecap to replace the torn ligament, he describes the recovery as, quote, painful as fuck.
It required this massive recovery period. He couldn't even kneel on that leg for a long, long time.
But then he contrasts that with the cadaver graft method, where they use an Achilles tendon from a donor. The recovery time was dramatically faster. He says it was a difference of almost 6 months, which is critical for an athlete whose career depends on getting back into competition quickly.
But there's a trap there, isn't there?
A huge trap. If you look at the physiology of it, that cadaver tendon, it acts like a scaffolding. Your body feels about 80% healed after just a couple of months because this new material is holding everything firm and stable.
But internally, the biological process, your own body slowly replacing that donor material with its own cells, that's not finished. That full integration takes around 6 months.
So you get this false sense of security. An athlete feels great. They combine that feeling with the numbing effect of opioids, and they start pushing way too hard, way too fast, and then they often pop the repair again before the biological integration is complete.
So his refusal of the pills, it ensures he maintains complete kinesthetic awareness. He can feel the real difference between just functional strength and true biological healing.
It's a calculated and I'm sure agonizing choice, but it's a choice made entirely to ensure the longevity of his career. Which brings us right back to that idea that calculated risks are what allow for 20-year careers.
So if radical accountability and this ability to endure pain are the engine of his success, the path itself, as you mentioned earlier, seems to be paved with what he repeatedly calls happy accidents. I feel like we need to challenge that term a little.
I completely agree, because while he describes these moments as luck, if you look closer, They are almost always the result of him intentionally placing himself in a high-leverage position to capitalize on a moment when it arrives. Let's start with his origin story.
Okay, so he's a lifelong wrestling fan. He gets back into it during the Attitude Era. But by the time he's 21, he has a degree in kinesiology. And he's working this dead-end minimum wage job at Gold's Gym in Venice, California.
Working the front desk, selling protein bars, cleaning the toilets, and crucially, he was sleeping in his 1991 Lincoln Continental in the gym's parking lot.
And this wasn't because he couldn't afford a room. He makes it clear he had a room waiting for him at his parents' house back in West Newbury, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
He chose to live in his car.
He saw it as strategic positioning. This was 1999-2000. He wanted to be at the absolute white-hot center of the fitness universe. He knew that environment was just saturated with bodybuilders, trainers, fitness pros, and he wanted to absorb all of that energy.
That choice to sleep in the car, that's not luck. That is intentional strategic discomfort.
And that positioning is what paid off with the so-called happy accident. His connection to the Bell brothers, Chris and Mark, who trained down in Orange County, that was the trigger. They noticed him constantly talking about the WWF, and they're the ones who suggested he go try out for a local wrestling school.
A conversation that never would have happened if he'd stayed in West Newbury. His deliberate choice to live at the center of the action put him directly in the path of that opportunity.
Exactly. And that leads us to the ultimate pivot, the gimmick that saved his entire career. He was told flat out that he was going to be fired from WWE.
His initial character just wasn't working. He wasn't connecting with the audience at all, and he was staring down immediate unemployment.
And when you're facing that terminal moment, that's when taking a radical risk becomes the only logical option. He decided to, in his words, go down swinging. He completely abandoned the failing character, which was apparently very generic, and he created this white rap hip-hop personality.
He started rapping, doing his own thing, saying what he called disrespectful shit, and just completely abandoning the backstage dress code.
And the initial creative tension was enormous. Vince McMahon, the ultimate authority in the company, initially hated the idea. And this is often where careers just end, right?
Yeah.
When the person at the very top kills your idea.
But McMahon, who's known for his, let's say, meritocratic view of the business, he respected the noise it was generating.
He saw the audience was responding. Even if they were responding negatively, it didn't matter. As Cena put it, he was proof positive of a meritocracy at work. Whether they were booing or cheering, the audience was engaged. And if the noise is there, you get another match. It's that simple.
And the birth of the gimmick itself was another one of these pure accidents. During an overseas tour, a bunch of the wrestlers were freestyling on the back of the bus just to pass the time.
And Cena, who usually kept to himself, he joined in. And according to the sources, he just filleted like 12 guys with these incredibly sharp rhymes.
And Stephanie McMahon happened to hear this performance. She was impressed by the raw charisma and suggested he should bring that to TV. She challenged him right then and there to freestyle something about her.
And that was the moment. That was when the white rapper character was officially greenlit for television.
This accidental creative boost then led to the perfect proving ground for him. He was placed on what he calls the dog shit Saturday night program, shows like Velocity.
And that obscurity was the ultimate gift. Because, like he said, no one's watching.
It provided the exact environment that the current generation of talent is missing. That low-rated platform gave him the freedom to be outlandish, to say racy shit, and to take ownership of it, calling himself Mr. Saturday Night.
He could risk, he could fail, he could refine the character, and eventually he secured his spot by generating enough noise to get moved to the main shows. He turned an accidental suggestion on a bus into a foundational, job-saving personality.
That character established him as a global superstar, which then leads to the next major career pivot, the leap into acting. And unlike his gimmick, this pivot started as a spectacular failure.
Oh, it was a complete rush job. Around 2009, 2010, Vince McMahon created WWE Studios with this goal of manufacturing movie stars who would then drive ticket sales for the wrestling shows, kind of like he did back in the 80s.
And Cena was rushed into these movies, like The Marine. And he's the first to admit his performance suffered because his mind was just still completely focused on the wrestling ring, the immediate electricity, the constant movement, the live audience reaction.
He just couldn't handle the tedious, patient nature of filmmaking. The sources detail his frustration, 12-hour days waiting around, sometimes just for a single 5:30 p.m. shot.
The kind of commitment you need on a film set is just diametrically opposed to the high-energy, rapid-fire nature of a live wrestling show.
And his agent, Dan Bayham, eventually had to deliver the hard truth. He told him they were run out of town after a string of bad movies because his performance just clearly demonstrated a complete lack of investment.
And that feedback, that's what forced the essential attitude shift. It's that radical accountability coming back again. Judd Apatow and Amy Schumer gave him a small part in Trainwreck back in 2015, and he realized he was suddenly surrounded by these serious comedic talents.
And he knew he had to invest the same hustle into this slow, patient process that he'd always applied to wrestling.
He committed himself to being coachable, professional, reliable, be interested. He accepted the tedium. He realized that these small roles, they were his new non-televised wrestling shows. They were his opportunities to fail safely, to learn the craft without all the global pressure.
The pivot was complete when he stopped being obsessed with the immediate gratification of the ring and he just accepted the waiting. And he realized he was finally getting to do something completely different after playing the same character for 15 years.
You know, if we distill everything we've talked about, the decade of Mandarin, the defiance of pain, the pivot to acting, it all seems to operate on this core system, this philosophy of success that's built on radical accountability and just relentless effort.
We've seen him reject the easy path again and again. Let's go back for a second to that geopolitical incident. When the interviewer is offering him all these perfect excuses, it was the PR assistant, maybe it was a setup, he just firmly chooses the burden of fault. He insists it was my fault.
He explained that choosing that difficult path, the path of self-blame, is the only way to guarantee a true course correction. If you blame someone else, you learn absolutely nothing, and you stay vulnerable to making the exact same mistake again.
Taking the fault. It requires a complete psychological overhaul of what you did wrong. It's the highest possible expression of ownership.
And that relentless effort, it translates directly into what he calls the high cost of excellence. Success, he argues, requires you to say yes to your career and an absolute unyielding no to pretty much everything else.
He draws a really fascinating parallel here. He cites the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, who famously works 7 days a week. And the motivation isn't really a thirst for more success, but this deep-seated fear of failure.
That fear is what drives the constant effort, the preparation, the willingness to sacrifice everything else in your life.
And that's the critical separation point, isn't it? If you want to achieve true excellence in anything, tech, acting, athletics, whatever, it requires that startup founder mentality.
Yeah.
He openly admits the toll it takes. Missed family events, strained relationships. Because that pursuit of lightning in a jar, it demands this constant, almost selfish devotion.
And this devotion, it manifests in what we can probably call the 4:30 a.m. wake-up principle. He states that whenever something difficult looks effortless or easy to you, the viewer, it is only because of relentless early morning preparation.
The prep has to be so complete that the execution, whether it's delivering a complex Mandarin monologue or a precise wrestling sequence, it just looks completely natural. He asserts there are no shortcuts. The armchair quarterback position is the easiest one in the world because it requires zero preparation and zero risk. Excellence demands the early wake-ups. Every single day.
And moving beyond just professional excellence, this whole philosophy seems to extend into some profound personal wisdom, especially about navigating conflict and past disappointments. The sources detail this long-standing grudge he held against his father.
For years, he held on to that grudge. He wanted his father to change, to apologize, to become the person that Cena thought he should be. And that was the easy emotional path to take. The hard thing, the wise thing, was eventually realizing that his father was, in his words, just you, and accepting him completely for exactly who he was.
He chose to mend those fences. He realized he didn't want to hold a grudge when they were both going in the dirt soon, which is a stark way to put it. But it emphasizes how that finite amount of time, it forces a necessary perspective.
And that acceptance, it led him to find the silver lining in that struggle. He realized that his father's absence in certain areas of his life, it actually created a profound desire to get what you need. That absence forced him to look outward, to seek out and find these valuable male mentors who ended up filling those structural and disciplinary gaps in his life.
And we see the examples. The gym owner who gave a 15-year-old kid a key to the gym, trusting him with that responsibility. The dean at his expensive school who bet on him, offering him financial aid on the condition that he improved his grades.
He might not have sought out or even honored those lessons in structure and accountability if the need hadn't been so pressing at home.
In that need, that desire to get what he lacked, it connects to his whole perspective on life, that it's just a series of opportunities that you have to embrace. His philosophy is to live useful and to embrace opportunities no matter how weird or terrifying they seem. Because a tough thing to do is to be constantly ready for the moments that life gives you.
And the ultimate, most high-profile example of that readiness is the incident at the Oscars. He was asked, very last minute, to participate in this bit where he had to walk out on stage completely naked with just an index card covering his genitals.
Think about the professional pressure in that moment. He's finally transitioning into being seen as a respected actor, and he's in a room full of the most esteemed professionals in his entire industry.